All right, this is episode 5 of Reading with Ron, book 1 of Blood of the Prince, Greater Things Than Thou by R.L. Dean. Chapter 5. 20 years ago, the old man could write for hours with a bevy of clerks and messengers circling his desk like a cyclone, but those days were gone. Now he needed quiet time, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee. Then he opened his writing kit. Then he needed more quiet time. And then finally his mind was organized enough to begin the first paragraph. It might take 20 years to write his memoirs. It was not Gil that woke me the morning. It was hunger. My stomach felt hollow, like a hole. Starvation was a scary thought. It wasn't something that I recalled ever facing. There was nothing I could do but lay in the dirt and watch the blackness inside the shack. I might even have dozed off again, because when next I became aware, my bladder was contending with my stomach for attention, and I could see pale light coming through the cracks around the door. Gil was standing, silent as a ghost, with a knife in one hand. I, I remained still, watching him. He seemed disorientated, like he wasn't awake yet. After a few moments, he opened the door and left the shack, and when he came back, he had a small sack in one hand and a half-eaten apple in the other. "Count yourself lucky, boy," he told me after he took a bite of the apple, chewed and swallowed it. "Baylor doesn't want you to starve." He dropped the sack on his mat and nodded his head at the floor. For a moment I thought about ignoring the implied command and glanced at the sack, but in the end I think it was my bladder that made me obey rather than the knife in his hand. I stood and put my hands over my private parts. "I have to pee." "Well, go," he roared at me. "The morning is burning away and there's firewood to cut." Even as I hurried out of the shack, my heart sank because I didn't know he would let me eat. I spent the morning gathering branches in the soaked forest as Gil watched. When it came time to cut the larger wood, he gave me a rusty axe that was too heavy for me to use, and he cursed and called me a weakling. After several attempts to threaten me into action, I was so scared I wanted to do what he said, but my body wasn't up to the task. He grabbed the axe from me and shoved me to the ground. I was so close to the wood he was cutting that I thought he was trying to arrange an accident. Baylor's camp was coming to life, and there were more people than I saw yesterday, maybe 50 or more. They tended to their morning duties. Some cut wood. Two old women washed clothes in the muddy, overflowing ditch. A man hauling manure in a cart from the stables I hadn't saw the day before. It was the things you would see in any woodland village, only much poorer. It was like living in the backwoods slum, and my perception wouldn't improve from that point on. It was a place where resources were not shared equally, and justice was Baylor's whim of the day. I survived Gil's wood splitting. He was out of breath and still trying to curse me. Over the years, I grew deaf to it. He was such a foul man. Gallon was foul too, but in a different way. The blood stains he put on my hands will never wash out. Gil made me carry the wood back to his shack and stack it. It was afternoon by the time I was allowed to eat, and my stomach felt hollow. I tried to eat the fruit and bread that Baylor sent, but threw most of it back up. The summer heat, dampness, and exhaustion was making me sick. The shack was stifling, but Gil wanted a fire because his boots were soaked. So was the wood. He doused it with lantern oil, which I was sure he stole from someone I once knew, but it would burn up without lighting the wood and fill the shack with black smoke because the vent pipe was clogged. Somehow it was my fault. He shoved me up on the roof and made me clean the pipe. An hour later, I was standing ankle deep in a muddy ditch washing his clothes. He didn't trust the old women to do it, or maybe there was money involved and he didn't want to pay. I thought bitterly that he should have something from the raid that he could give the old women instead of making me do it. My days with Gil were the same. They merged and blurred until sometimes I couldn't tell when it was a new week or when the old one ended. There was always work to do, mostly things he wanted done for himself, his laundry, firewood, and work around his shack. Sometimes I worked in the stables or gathered firewood for others, but it was rare and always because Baylor ordered it. Baylor's people were not interested in associating with me. and they were not as harsh as Gil. If I was brought to them for work, they would tell me what to do, then ignore me. They didn't complain or curse me. Gil watched from nearby, sometimes drinking. I didn't see Baylor much during that time. He continued to send food, but never came to Gil's shack. The rare occasions that I did see him, he was either sitting in a chair on the porch of his large cabin, wild haired and smoking a pipe like a gentleman, or at the stables brushing his well fed bay. At night, Gil would sit on his mat, carving small blocks of wood with his knife and drinking himself into a stupor. Sometimes he would become paranoid and tie me up, saying that I might run away. It didn't seem to matter that I had no idea where I was, nor that they had burned my village to the ground. I had nowhere to go. I didn't know what he was trying to make or carve. He never seemed successful. Often he would hurl the carved wood blocks against the wall of his shack. A few times he stomped them into the dirt floor. I did learn one thing from watching him, though. I discovered what he treasured. He had a second knife. It was small, ornate. Sometimes he used it to hack on his wooden blocks, and no matter how frustrated he became with his inability to make something, whatever it might be, he would always care for the knife. He cleaned and oiled it each time. Sometimes he would hold it in his hands and just stare at it like a painting, tilting the silvery little blade and making it flicker in the shack's lamplight. I amended my earlier vow to kill him. That little knife was what I was going to use to cut his throat with. Gil never made conversation with me, and I had never dared to try. He was a hard man and hated me. Each time I thought he had become used to my presence in his life, something would happen to make him angry. Once, when I was doing his laundry, one of the old women laughed at him for some reason, and it earned me a kick that sent me face first in the ditch. I thought he might beat the old woman, but he just cursed and yelled at me to get back to work. I was not allowed to dry my clothes that night and was forced to sleep in them wet. My little corner of the shack was always muddy. My last night spent in the shack with Gil was spent tied up. His paranoia was in full swing, and it didn't look like the alcohol was going to take the edge off. He sat on his mat carving, while I lay as still as I could on the floor, trying not to draw his attention. "I know you're watching me, boy," he said suddenly out of the quiet. I was afraid to sleep with my back to him, but if I faced him, I tried not to appear like I was watching him. When he was like this, it would just antagonize him. He gave me a serpent smile and held up his carving knife. "You didn't think I knew, did you? You want this." I did, but only to ram it through his eyeball. I would have gladly left it there. He set his wood block aside and stood sheathing his knife. "You won't be staying with me any more, boy. You'll be with Baylor from now on." Another smile appeared, and he made a stumble toward me. "I think I should give you a going-away present." Fear. My heart began to hammer inside my chest as he closed in on me, a lengthening shadow on the shack walls against the lamplight. Grabbing my arm, he jerked me to his knees. My eyes went wide and my teeth were chattering. Drunk, he stumbled again, but managed to turn and drag me towards the door. I said something. I don't remember what it was. It was more of a cry or a squeal. I don't know what he was going to do to me. Better for him to play nursemaid. I hate weaklings, he was saying as he dragged me around the back of the shack. There he shoved me down on the ground and turned to the pile of firewood stacked against the wall. It was covered with a woven straw mat, like what he slept on to keep the wood semi-dry from Denon's sudden rains. In a drunken fit, he yanked the mat from the pile and threw it on the ground. "Get on that mat," he said. I was too afraid to move, and he cursed, grabbing me again and throwing me on the mat. He straightened me out, then shoved a rag in my mouth. I peed on myself. In the grayish moonlight, he stood over me. He laughed, staggering, and pulled his carving knife after staring at the blade. And then after staring at the blade for a few moments, he put it back in his belt, then rolled me up in the mat. Then he kicked me repeatedly. Well, that was the first 5 chapters of Greater Things Than Thou, Book 1 in the Blood of the Prince series. You can find me on Amazon. Thanks for listening, guys. I'll see you later.